The conference room still smelled like stale coffee and dry erase markers when my access card blinked red. Not a glitch, not a system error. The little light on the reader went from green to red in the time it took the room to go quiet. 23 people watched it happen. Nobody said a word. My son-in-law was still standing at the head of the table, hand resting on the back of my chair like he'd already moved in. He'd been using that chair for 6 weeks, ever since his father-in-law, my boss, technically, though I'd never really thought of him that way, had handed him the COO title and a corner office he hadn't earned and couldn't spell. I looked at the card reader. I looked at him. He had the kind of smile that people wear when they've rehearsed it. "Effective immediately," he said. "Your role is being restructured." That was the word he used. Restructured. I'd built the routing algorithm that kept this company's entire supply chain running. 17 years. 3 patents. The kind of work that doesn't show up on an org chart because it's underneath the org chart, underneath the foundation, underneath everything they'd ever sold or shipped or invoiced. And my son-in-law, 31 years old, Rotman MBA, never written a line of code in his life, had just restructured me out of the building. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up my laptop bag, looked at him across the table, and said one thing. "Did you read Section 4.7 of the licensing agreement?" He blinked. Just once. Then the smile came back, a little tighter this time. "We'll have legal review everything. You can go, Gareth." I nodded. I walked out, and I let the door close very quietly behind me because I already knew what Section 4.7 said. I'd written it. I should explain how I got here because none of this makes sense without the beginning. I came to Canada in 1994 with a master's in computer engineering from McGill and a job offer from a mid-sized logistics firm in Mississauga that most people haven't heard of. The firm was called Meridian Cargo Solutions. It's bigger now. Much bigger. That's partly my fault. In 2003, I developed a routing algorithm that could recalculate freight paths in real time. Rerouting around weather events, border delays, carrier capacity issues, faster and more accurately than anything else on the market at the time. I called it the Meridian Adaptive Routing Engine, MER internally, and I filed 3 patents through a personal holding company I'd set up on the advice of a lawyer friend who told me, very plainly, never assign your IP to your employer unless they're paying you like they mean it. They weren't paying me like they meant it. So I didn't. What I did instead was license MER to Meridian under a 15-year agreement. They got exclusive commercial use. I got a licensing fee tied to revenue, a seat on the technical advisory board, Section 4.7, that said the license would automatically revert to my holding company if I was terminated without cause, with 60 days written notice and a full IP audit. The CEO at the time, a man named Douglas, shook my hand when we signed it and said, "Gareth, this protects both of us." He was right. He understood what he was licensing. He'd read the agreement. His daughter married my son, and that was fine for a while. My son is a good man. He works in environmental law in Vancouver and has nothing to do with any of this. The problem was her brother. His name was Thaddeus. Thad, he insisted, because Thaddeus sounded too much like something that required effort. He'd done his undergrad at Western, spent 2 years at a consulting firm in Toronto that laid him off during a restructuring. I always found that ironic, and then completed his MBA at Rotman, which his father paid for, which somehow became the credential that qualified him to run a company he'd never worked at. When Douglas stepped back in the spring and handed Thad the COO role, I watched it happen from my office and thought, this will be fine. I can work with this. I've worked with worse. I was wrong about that. Within 3 months, Thad had rebranded the internal dashboard, hired 2 of his university friends as innovation leads, introduced a weekly all-hands he called a momentum meeting, and informed the engineering team that MER was legacy infrastructure that needed to be modernized and brought in-house. Brought in-house. That was the phrase. As if MER were a stray. I requested a meeting. He gave me 12 minutes between his lunch and a call with a branding consultant. I explained as plainly as I could that MER was not Meridian's IP to modernize, that the licensing agreement was still active, that any attempt to reverse engineer or replicate the system without my consent would be a violation of 3 federal patents and a commercial contract. He leaned back in his chair and said, "I think our legal team has a different read on that." "They haven't read it," I said. "Gareth." He said my name the way people say it when they're about to tell you something they think you're too old to understand. The company has evolved. The IP landscape has evolved. We're going to need you to be a team player here. I stood up. I thanked him for his time. I went back to my office and called my lawyer. Her name is Vivienne. She's a partner at a firm in downtown Toronto, and she has handled my IP portfolio for 11 years. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Send me the full employment record and the licensing agreement. Don't do anything yet, and don't quit." I waited. The termination came on a Tuesday in October. It was a boardroom meeting I'd been called to without an agenda. 6 people in the room, Thad at the head, 2 HR representatives, a woman from their legal team I didn't recognize, my direct supervisor, a man named Percival who had the expression of someone watching a car accident from a bus, and me. The HR director slid a package across the table. "Without cause," she said. "We're offering 8 weeks severance and a letter of reference. 8 weeks, for 17 years. Thad was watching me with that rehearsed smile. He'd worn it to my son's wedding. I remembered that now. Mary continues to operate under the company's existing IP framework, the woman from legal said, reading from a document. We consider the algorithm fully integrated into Meridian's proprietary systems. I picked up the severance package. I read the first page. I set it back down. Has anyone in this room read Section 4.7 of the licensing agreement? I asked. Silence. The one signed in 2006, I said. Between Meridian Cargo Solutions and my holding company, Caraway Systems Inc. Thad cleared his throat. Our legal team has reviewed the relevant documents. Section 4.7, I said again, states that in the event of termination without cause, the license reverts automatically to Caraway Systems Inc. with 60 days written notice and a full IP audit. You've just given me written notice. I tapped the severance package. This is the written notice. The woman from legal looked at Thad. He looked at her. Percival looked at the table. I stood up, picked up my bag, and said the same thing I'd said 6 months earlier when this all started. Section 4.7. Read it. And then I walked out into the October air and called Vivienne. She'd been ready for this call. I think she'd been ready for 3 months. 60-day clock starts today, she said. I'm filing the reversion notice this afternoon. We'll also notify the patent office. Do you have full backups of the original code repositories? I did. I'd been backing them up to a secure server in my home office every Sunday for the last 4 years. Ever since Thad had joined and I'd started paying attention to that little voice in the back of my head that said, "Be ready." Good, she said. Don't access Meridian systems. Don't respond to anything from their legal team without running it through me first. And Gareth, don't tell your son. Not yet. This is going to get complicated, and he doesn't need to be in the middle of it. She was right about that too. The first 48 hours were quiet. I took a long walk along the lakeshore. I called my sister in Calgary and talked for an hour about nothing important. I made dinner, I read. On the third day, my phone rang at 11:15 at night. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, this is exactly what Section 4.7 is for. Hello? A man's voice, low and careful. Is this Gareth? Speaking. This is. I'm calling on behalf of some people at Meridian. People who are concerned. I'm listening. There's been some confusion internally about the licensing situation. Some people are wondering if there's a way to reach an arrangement before things escalate. I knew the voice. It was Percival. Of course, it was Percival. He'd been there for 13 years and he understood, better than most, what Mary actually did. Percival, I said. Long pause. The reversion notice was filed this afternoon, I said. You'll want to talk to Vivian Ostrowski at Kellerman LLP. She's handling all communications going forward. I hung up. Here's what they didn't know, or didn't want to know, or had convinced themselves wasn't true. Mare wasn't just running their domestic freight routes. Over 17 years, it had been integrated, quietly, incrementally, the way real infrastructure always grows, into the routing systems of 4 provincial government logistics contracts, 2 major retailers with cross-border operations, and a federal supply chain pilot program that had been running since 2019. When the 60-day window expired and the license formally reverted to Caraway Systems, Mare didn't just stop working for Meridian. It stopped working, period, until each of those clients renegotiated their arrangements directly with me. I don't say this with satisfaction exactly. People's jobs were affected. Shipments were delayed. There were 3 days in November when a hospital system in southern Ontario had distribution issues that made the news. And I want to be clear that Vivienne and I had already been in direct contact with the provincial ministry for 2 weeks by that point. And everything critical was rerouted through a contingency arrangement we'd structured specifically so that wouldn't happen. I'm not built that way, but I also wasn't going to pretend that what Thad had done was acceptable. The call from Meridian's actual legal team came on day 11. Not the woman from the boardroom, a senior partner from a firm in Bay Street, calm professional, clearly embarrassed by the situation he'd been handed. "Mr. Carraway," he said, "I want to acknowledge that the reversion process was validly triggered. We're not disputing that." "I appreciate that," I said. "What we're hoping to discuss is a path forward that works for all parties. Meridian would like to explore a new licensing arrangement." "That's possible," I said. "My current rate is 12% of gross revenue from any system or process that uses Mayor-derived routing. That's up from the 3% in the original agreement." Silence. "I'd also require board-level notification rights for any restructuring that affects technical operations," I said. "And a seat on the technical advisory board with actual authority, not advisory." More silence. "And Thad," I said, "is not part of any conversation I have with Meridian going forward. That's not negotiable. I won't pretend the next 6 weeks were easy. There were lawyers and counteroffers and one particularly unpleasant afternoon where Thad apparently called my son in Vancouver to try to get him to intervene. And my son called me that evening, voice tight, and said, 'Dad, what is happening?' I told him everything. It took 2 hours. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line, and then he said, 'You should have told me sooner.' 'I know,' I said. 'I'm sorry? Are you okay?' 'Yeah,' I said. 'I'm okay.' And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I actually meant it. The settlement was finalized in January. The new licensing agreement runs 10 years at 11%. We compromised, with the board notification rights and the advisory seat. Thad quietly moved out of the COO role before Christmas. The official announcement said he was pursuing other opportunities. I have no idea what those are, and I genuinely don't think about it. What I do think about is a letter I received in February from the Federal Ministry Foresees the Supply Chain Pilot Program. It was 3 paragraphs, formal language, government letterhead. It thanked Carraway Systems for its continued contribution to critical national infrastructure. It said Mayor had been designated a protected supply chain asset under a new federal framework. My wife read it over my shoulder and said, "Well, that's something." It was something. It was 17 years of work being seen, officially, by someone with the authority to see it. I framed it. It's on the wall of my home office, next to a photo from 2003, where I'm at my old desk at Meridian, 27 years younger, with a printout of the first successful Mayor test run in my hand, grinning like I had no idea what was coming. I didn't. But I wrote section 4.7 anyway. That's the thing about building something real. You don't always know why you're protecting it. You just know that it matters and that someday someone is going to try to take it. And you want to be ready when they do. I was ready.